Kashmir, throughout its history, has been deeply influenced by poetic figures, from the great Sufi mystic poets of the valley to those who may have not followed the Sufi path but left a lasting mark through their poetry. In this very land, we see the likes of the great saint and foundational poet Lala Ded and her contemporary, the greatest Kashmiri Sufi poet Sheikh Nuruddin Nurani, also known to the world as Noon Rishi or Sheikh Alam. Then there are poets like Mahjoor and Haba Khatun, whose words still echo in the hearts of the valley. But there was one Sufi poet whose mastery of language made even the most famous Sufi verses seem simple. From working as a weaver to weaving spiritual verses that would be sung for centuries, he remained unknown to many, yet his poetry, rich in Kashmiri dialect and blended with words from Sanskrit, Arabic and Persian, made his style truly unique. We are of course talking about the weaver of verses, Rahim Shah, known to the world as Rahim Sahab Sopori. Rahim Sahab Sopori, born in 1775 in Sopore, was a celebrated Sufi poet and saint of the Qadri order. His name was Rahim Shah, as grew up in Telian Mahalla, Sopore. Sources note two traditions about his family. Some say he belonged to the cowherd family, but scholars argue he was more likely from a weaving family, having learned to weave at Bhatpora, Sopore. Bhatpora's neighborhood was known for its Shaivite influence, which helps explain Rahim Sahab's later poetic use of Sanskrit terms. Rahim Sahab's early life is not well documented, but Kashmiri oral tradition preserves a key incident that set him on the Sufi path. It's said that during a visit to the tomb of Hazrat Sayyid Jamaluddin Bukhari in Sopore, the young Rahim Sahab exchanged mystical verses with a pious woman. The poetic dialogue emphasized the importance of a spiritual guide or murshid in seeking the ultimate truth. Inspired by the encounter, Rahim Sahab resolved to find a guide. Initially, he became a disciple of Pir Ghulam Qadir Malik, or known to the world as Hazrat Qadir Shah Sahab. Hazrat Qadir Shah Sahab was from Ranan Qaziabad. Through his mentor, he formally joined the Qadri Sufi Silsila or Qadri Sufi order, a lineage tracing back to the famous saint Abdul Qadir Jilani, and he also identified with the Chishti Silsila or Chishti Sufi order. Rahim Sahab himself alludes to these ties in his verses. The Chishti Sufi order was fairly unique in Kashmir. Though not many Sufi poets or Sufi saints have been from the Chishti order in Kashmir, Rahim Sahab was one exception. Under his Murshid's guidance, Rahim Sahab immersed himself in devotional practice and teaching. He is described as a Sufi both in person and poetry, living a simple life of simple devotion. He is reported to have preached Sufi ethics and even composed verses that retold stories from the Quran in a poetic style. His poetry often remembered like verses said in spiritual gatherings, blending Kashmiri folk imagery and Islamic mysticism. Remarkably, the great poet-philosopher Allama Mohammad visited Kashmir in 1931. Local singers said the poetry of Rahim Sahab's Persian ghazals, and Iqbal was reportedly delighted, remarking that his own ancestors came from the land of Sufi saints. Rahim Sopori explicitly names the Qadri lineage in his poetry, underscoring his devotion to that order. For example, one couplet declares in Kashmiri, Rahim in the Qadri Silsila of the Divine Truth, a phrase from one of his poems. In one another verse, he similarly cites the Chishti chain. These affirmations shows that he saw himself firmly rooted in Kashmiri Islam mystic tradition, while also honoring early local mystics like Laleshwari or Laladat and Sheikh Nuruddin Nurani, known to the world as Noon Rishi. Rahim Sahab mainly wrote in Kashmiri language. Nearly all of his surviving verses are in Kashmiri. Although he also composed some Persian poems from which he is remembered, as with the Iqbal anecdote, his complete works have been collected in a volume of Kashmiri poetry, most famously by Shafi Shauq and also by Mohammad Amin Shakeeb. While he did not leave behind a long philosophical treatise, he left dozens of short poems, many of these qasidas or devotional odes that were passed down in local Sufi circles. Rahim Sahab Sopori's poetry is soaked in the sorrow of longing, the ache of divine absence, and the surrender of the soul. His verses do not speak of casual yearning, they cry out from the depth of separation, from the pain of not being seen or not being answered. This is one of a constructive approach to his poem. In his poem, Weird Are My Eyes, he opens with a full plea of fatigue yet devotion. He says, quote, Wearied are my eyes in looking for your coming. If you do not come, I might die. In the blood of my throat I shall write you a letter. Left to sneers I am utterly ruined. I am abandoned, left to pine. A little while ago I weirdly saw him. In rapture I was out of myself. All of a sudden I lost sight of him. I too ventured to play dice. Unlucky, I am got only to pips. I am put on bed and left to scorn. In youth I died in pomegranate red. Thus I showcased the shawl. The moths, alas, reduced it to bits. The archer threw an arrow at me. It pierced my bosom, no pity he showed. I am left gashed and left to pain. O Rahim, he is surely living here. Nabi alone shall be the abider there. Rahim needs not to have any fears. If we construct his poem carefully, we see he here is on the edge, drained by waiting, consumed by hope. The beloved's absence is not a metaphor, it's life-threatening. He continues with a voice of soul that has offered everything. Even mocked and ridiculed, he remains faithful. The phrase, in the blood of my throat, reveals the depth of his desperation. When words fail, he will write with his wounds. This sudden disappearance of his, saying, a little while ago I rarely saw him. In rapture I was out of myself. All of a sudden I lost sight of him. This brief glimpse of truth followed by the return to separation mirrors the Sufi experience of ecstatic presence and separation. Even in joy, his game turns cruel and he portrays his life or love as a gamble in which he always loses. Yet even in loss, there is no turning back. The imagery that intensifies is when he speaks of his youth. He says, in youth I died in pomegranate red. He speaks of purity, beauty and spiritual offering, but the world of fate destroys what he offers. He is sincere in his love and is torn apart like delicate clothes by moths. Still he does not accuse, he endures. There's no complaint here, he says, just an acknowledgement. The pain is absolutely real for him, the wounds are deep, and the archer, who he interprets as God, shows no pity. Yet Rahim does not fall into despair. He ends it with, O Rahim, he is surely living here. Nabi alone shall be the abider there. Rahim needs not to have any worry. Despite all the suffering, he affirms faith. The Prophet, or Nabi as he says, will be his witness, his intercessor. The final couplet reflects the Sufi belief that enduring love leads to union, that all suffering of the path is not wasted. He also celebrates prophetic and saintly love, mainly of his poems and paeans to the Prophet Mohammad, and he incorporates motifs from Kashmiri Shaivite lore alongside Islamic mysticism. For instance, scholars note that Rahim Sahab freely uses Sanskrit-derived words and Hindu mystical symbols in his poetry, reflecting that syncretic culture of native Sopore. One commentator observes that Rahim Sahab's work possessed equal mastery over Islamic mysticism and Kashmir Shaiva Shastra. Blending the two traditions seamlessly, his poetry, in the cases of love and faithfulness, are constant themes. His song overflows with intense spiritual longing and attachment, both to God and to the Prophet. Another notable aspect is his use of Kashmiri folk idiom. Rahim Sahab wrote in the dialect of Sopore, yet he enriched it with words from Persian, Arabic and Sanskrit, making his verses both local and universal. His meter and dictation were reportedly so skillful that even later Kashmiri people would perform his poems at Sufi mehfils or Sufi gatherings. Rahim Sahab's life, 1775 to 1850 AD, spans a turbulent era in Kashmir. The final years of Afghan rule and the early decades of Sikh and then Dogra rule. Despite political upheavals, this was also a time when Kashmiri culture absorbed influences from Central Asia, Persia, and India. The valley's Sufi heritage was well established, with saints like Noon Rishi, Lala Dad, Hamza Makhdoom, Sakhi Zainuddin Wali, and others from early centuries. So Rahim Sahab inherited a mixed tradition of Islam and local spirituality. In this setting, Kashmir became a refined literary language. Rahim Sahab contributed to the flowering of 18th and 19th century Kashmiri literature. His syncretic style combined Quranic stories, Sufi philosophy, and Hindu mystical symbols, reflects the cultural fusion of Kashmir at that time. For example, living in a neighborhood shaped in Shiite history, he naturally inserted Sanskrit words in Kashmiri verses. At the same time, he remained throughoutly Islamic in sentiment. His poems often paraphrased or allude to Quranic narratives, yet they do not so in simple folk verse. Notably, Rahim Sahab is part of the lineage of Kashmiri Sufi poets who used the vernacular to convey mystical ideas. He followed figures like Hazrat Rishi Ala Rach Sahab, which was somewhere in the 15th century, and preceded later poets such like Rasul Mir and the 20th century mystics like Shams Fakir and Wahab Khar. His use of Kashmiri idiom and metaphors helped pave the way for the successors. The Qadri and Chishti Sufi orders that he belonged to remained influential in the valley's spiritual life throughout the 19th century and beyond. In short, Rahim Sopori stands as a bridge between Kashmir's older Hindu-Buddhist path and its Islamic Sufi present, embodying the region's pluralistic culture in his writings. Through Rahim Sahab's poetry was cherished in his time, later generations almost forgot him in mainstream history. As one modern writer laments, very little is written about him. He has almost been forgotten by Kashmiris. However, among traditional Sufi circles, his legacy endures. His verses still resonate in Kashmiri Sufi mahfils, and his sayings are quoted by local scholars of mysticism. His emphasis on universal love, compassion, and peace, drawing equally on Islamic and Kashmiri ancient wisdom, has led some of the people to note that his work communicates with equal felicity to the people of all faiths. Even if formal biographies have been scarce, Rahim Sahab's literary and spiritual impact is recognized by enthusiasts. For example, Sahitya Academy and other local cultural organizations have published studies of his life and poetry in recent years, reviving interest in his work. In Kashmir's oral tradition, his poetic-like verses are still remembered by older poets, and his teachings continue to guide followers of the Qadri path in Kashmir. In literature, he is remembered as one of the great 19th century Sufi poets, a mystic whose words captured the spirit of his age. In summary, Rahim Sahab Sopori, or as his real name, Abdul Rahim Shah, emerged as a unique figure in Kashmiri history, a weaver turned Sufi who wove together threads of Islamic mysticism and Kashmiri heritage. His life story, from humble origins to spiritual awakening, and his poetry, rich in love, devotion, and syncretic symbolism, exemplifies the Kashmiri Sufi tradition. Today, his verses, translated into many languages, and his tomb in Sopore remind us that his spiritual and literary legacy endures well beyond his lifetime. For this video, I've taken the sources and resources like Kashmiri Sufi poetry by Mr. Shafi Shauq and his biography by Mohammad Amin Shakeeb, which is also in an English translation. You can find it down in the description. I will also link Kashmiri Sufi poetry by Shafi Shauq and also some of the articles and sources I've used to make this video. I will see you next time.